It's great to see you all. Canada has been such an important place for me in my career, and I'm so thrilled to be on stage today sharing some insights from that career that I've been so lucky to be on with you today. But first of all, thanks to SaaS North for bringing us all together today and for having me here. I couldn't be more excited. And I'm thrilled to be spending a few days with you guys before I head back south to eat some turkey and potentially get trampled at a mall. So this might be the last you see of me. So before we get started, I want to reflect on one fact, which is there are somehow only 39 days left in 2019. I just looked it up on my phone. If your 2019 has been anything like mine, it's been incredibly stressful. It feels like every day there's another tech company in the news, some rising star that's fallen from grace. And it's been a really scary time to be in tech, admittedly. But today, what I want to do is step back and take some lessons from 2019 and the broader SaaS ecosystem and help you guys build the best companies that you can. So first, let's reflect a little bit on 2019. As I mentioned, it's been a tough year, but really stepping back and focusing on some of the fundamentals here, what do we see? It's a pretty good time to be in SaaS. Look at these multiples. This is over the last 5 years, just enterprise value to revenue, nothing fancy. And as we can see here, SaaS companies, even after the correction from the summer, are still trading at historical highs. It's a great time to be in SaaS, and the reason why is SaaS fundamentally is such a powerful business model. Over time, you can build just amazingly efficient companies that can be global and scale without a ton of capital investment. And investors are really starting to wake up to that all around the world. And specifically for you guys, as Leo alluded to, this has been a great time for Canadian tech. Even with those 39 days left in the year, we've already hit our 2018 funding targets for VC investment in Canadian software companies. And this year has also seen some landmarks, like Leo mentioned, one of which is particularly dear to my heart. I spent 5 years before I joined Excel working at Lightspeed HQ, which, as you all know, went public this March. This is Dax, our founder and CEO, looking as dapper as ever. And another major landmark, both for Excel and for the Canadian ecosystem, is an investment that Leo didn't mention, which is a $200 million check written by Excel, the largest single check ever in our history, written right here into the Canadian ecosystem, into Toronto-based 1Password. We couldn't be more excited about what all of you guys in this room are building today, and I'm confident that one of the great global companies of tomorrow is in this room today. So at Excel, we've been really, really fortunate to partner with some of the world's most amazing and impactful companies, including many of the world's leading SaaS companies. You can see the SaaS ones highlighted in red here behind me. And so, in order to help you guys kind of think through what an ideal playbook might look like, I wanted to draw on some of the lessons from our portfolio, my personal experience, and public companies to really help you understand what it takes to build a global SaaS company today. So, before we get started, I want to caveat by saying this is not going to be a traditional playbook. There's not going to be checklists, and I apologize. The takeaway here is there is no one playbook that will make you an amazing company. Instead, you all, as founders and executives in this room, need to reflect on your market and your product, which you know better than anyone else on the planet. You live it, you work it 80 hours a week or more, and we trust you to understand what's best for your business. So what I'm going to lead you through, instead of a checklist, is really some exercises and some questions to get you thinking about what might be best for your business in particular. So I'm going to start a little bit with what investors typically ask you for and what we're really trying to understand. So you've seen these words many times in your career: LTV to CAC, payback period, magic number, not dollar retention or net revenue retention, depending on who you are. What are we really trying to understand when we look at these numbers? Well, it's something as simple as something that you've been obsessed about from the first day you started your company and just had a PowerPoint and an idea: product market fit. At the heart of it, these numbers, even though they're maybe the result on your spreadsheet, are not the goal. The goal is to build a product that really fits your market and really capitalizes on what's unique about your market and your product to hit on the points that are going to make it so that you can build and scale a business effectively. Let's take a look at an example of this by digging into one of the most common SaaS metrics, magic number. So magic number, the definition is on the left for those of you who need a reminder. Basically, it's just a fancy way of understanding your ROI on your sales and marketing spend. That's all it is. The more important part on the right is some public company standouts that have amazing magic numbers. But the thing I want to draw your attention to today is not the number itself, but the fact that these three companies, even though they're standouts even in the public markets, have arrived at this amazing metric in three very, very different ways. So first, let's talk through Excel portfolio company, Atlassian. Atlassian, very, very famously, spends only 15% of its revenue on sales and marketing. The reason it's able to do that is because it's created this suite of products that is so beloved by developers that as the software market grew, it basically became the de facto standard for you to build your software team around. As a result, I remember at Lightspeed when I was calling somebody to try to negotiate down prices, there was no one at Atlassian for me to call. They just simply didn't have a sales team. And they can get away with that because they built a product that's so de facto standard and allows you to build from just your first developer up until your 1,000th in a very seamless way. Contrast that to Viva. Viva has some of the largest contract values in the business, sometimes topping $1 million a year or more. They sell to a very, very distinct group of high-value, high-touch clients in the life sciences industry. When they went public, they had fewer than 200 customers. And what works for Viva wouldn't have worked for Atlassian, or vice versa. Similarly, Shopify, which just announced that it has 1 million merchants, which is an incredible number, has a very different sales strategy than both of them. Shopify kind of uses SaaS as an entry point and then adds payments and other merchant services like Marketplace to build the value that it's able to accrue from each customer over time. So at the end result, you get these beautifully efficient companies, but three very different paths of getting there. And that's the important point I want to share with you today, is that there is no right answer to get to this magic number. It depends on you and your understanding of your market and your product to be able to get to this end result. This is an indicator, this number. It's not a goal. Your goal is product market fit. So when we think about how do we win this, it really is a broad strategic question versus a checklist. Stop me if you've heard this before. You've probably heard someone say like, oh, better unit economics, raise your prices. And that can make a ton of sense if you're in a market like Viva and you're trying to extract the maximum value from a small group of customers. But if you're Shopify and you're trying to build up a large group of customers that you can upsell a broader suite of products to, that might spell doom for you later on and isn't a great long-term strategy. So the first thing to think about is, how do I actually win this market? Do I do something that's at one end of the spectrum, where we think about companies, and I know these aren't SaaS, like Google or Facebook, that are basically giving away their products to their end users for free and then monetizing the huge data moat that they have as a result? Or am I at the other end of the spectrum, like Viva, where I'm handling just a small number of customers and really deriving the most value I can from them? How you build your company and what your winning strategy is dependent on really understanding that question of how to win. So in the last 39 days of the year, I invite you to reflect on that question and really understand, am I building my company in the right way towards that goal? Am I really architecting my sales team, my go-to-market motion, my product, everything around that eventual goal of how do I win in the long term? And because everybody likes a quick win, there's a quick idea on the bottom here for you that's a little bit more tactical that worked very well for us, frankly, at Lightspeed, which was understanding how to granularly look at customer acquisition cost. I promise you, if for the rest of the week you go home and you ask your finance person or your marketing person to slice CAC in a way that you haven't looked at it before. So maybe if you're looking at it by region, look at it by country or even city. If you're looking at it by marketing buckets, look at it by AdWords category. Just go to that next level of granularity, and I'm sure you'll be surprised by what you find. So I'm going to take a brief pause right now to show you, and I know it's a little early in the morning for this, the world's most beautiful slice of cake. Probably not what you were expecting. This is Slack's net revenue retention chart. What this shows is Slack's revenue by cohort, so you can see the fiscal years on the side there, and how it builds up over time. And the reason this chart is so beautiful, at least to me, a nerdy investor, is that it shows the power of SaaS's business model, where you see Slack bringing in customers very early and then having them expand in revenue over time as their usage increases. It's enormously powerful and ends up creating this beautiful cake where the dollar I spent today continues to accrue value over time. It's one of the best looking charts in the business. I remember gasping when I first saw this on their S1. So how do you make your cohort chart delicious? I know a lot of you have your phones and laptops open anyway, so I invite you to take a look at Slack's pricing page while I go through this story, which may sound familiar to you because it's probably how Slack got adopted in your organization. And so as I talk through this, I want you to remember that Slack's magic isn't about their particular way that they price, but rather about their deep understanding of their customer journey. So here's the story. You have a developer or two. They're into the best tools on the market, as developers tend to be, and so they download Slack. And it's 2 of them or 3 of them at first, and it costs $7 per user per month. Doesn't even get flagged on an expense report because it's the cost of maybe 2 cups of coffee. Who cares? But then developers start catching on, and they realize that Slack allows them a really efficient way to communicate. All of a sudden, all the product managers have to be on Slack as well because the developers have all stopped answering their emails. And then support goes on, and then sales, and then your IT team comes to you and is like, hey, what is this Slack thing? And people keep asking me to reset their passwords. It's crazy this isn't managed. We need to get this under control. And then you go to the Slack upgrade plan. A little bit more time passes, and soon you realize you're paying for Slack for everyone in your organization, as well as some key customers and partners who don't even work with you. And it's amazing to see how incredibly central Slack becomes as a result of that. And we see this story over and over and over again in Slack's customer story. And if you follow through their pricing plan, you'll see that they follow the value proposition from just users to communication and control from the IT team to real compliance at the end when it's become so central to you and you realize that the data that's in there is something you need to really understand as a broader organization. And of course, as I promised, a tactical thing for you to do at the end of the week is really understanding and connecting up your support team with sales and product. Support is massively underutilized for most companies as a source of, frankly, the voice of the customer, as well as a source of leads. Sometimes, as it turns out, the best solution to a customer's problem is to upgrade them to the next plan. And your sales team might not even be aware of that. And instrumenting something that allows you to close that loop between those 3 teams is enormously powerful for many companies. And if you haven't figured out how to do that, I might suggest Slack. So, in kind of conclusion here on this part of the talk, I want to step back and really drive home the point that the metrics are not the goal. Your ability to craft your company to fit your market and your product is. Here's a metric that we don't often look at, which is revenue per employee. Now, imagine if you were building your company to optimize this metric. You might go home and lay off a bunch of people. And to be totally clear, I do not want you to do that. Please don't go do that. But if, we think about unit economics in much the same way. We look at payback period, or we will look at magic number, and we squint at it and we say, oh, that's too low, and then we react. We cut a bunch of salespeople, or we reduce the amount of support that people have for certain plans, or we very popularly raise prices. But if that's not the right end strategy for you, you might see a small uptick up front, but in the long run, it's not the winning strategy for you to build a huge global business. At the end of the day, only you, as entrepreneur and executive in this room, knowing this market better than anyone else does, can build something that's going to stand the test of time. So where do we go from here? I've given you some questions to think about and some tactical things to do. And the end game of this, as a CEO, your goal is to really understand, how do I win? And then your goal is to communicate to your executive team, here's how we're going to measure it. For execs, your goal is to understand that measurement to the depths of it, really understand how to inflect those points. And then finally, you're ready to be able to implement some metrics that allow everyone in the organization to understand very finely and on a real-time basis where you stand. And so here's something that really impacted us at Lightspeed and something I was really proud to do. When I started at Lightspeed, our analysis team was basically me opening a bunch of blank Excel spreadsheets. And about 3 years in, I realized that was crazy. I also wasn't sleeping very much. And I re-architected our data stack. And at the end, when I left Lightspeed after about 5 years there, we had a beautifully self-serve data service that allowed people to pull reports that were really relevant to them and create dashboards that allowed them to surface the metrics that were most important to tracking how their team and the broader company were doing. I couldn't have done it without Looker, frankly. So I'm very excited for our next guest here, who I'll introduce in a moment. But at the end of the day, building a data-driven culture comes from all 3 steps we've talked about. 1 is the high-level strategy of how do I win. 2 is linking that into metrics and inflecting those. And finally, your last piece should be, now that I have my metrics defined, how do I get them out in a place where everybody trusts them, that everyone's looking at them, and that we really have transparency around data throughout the company? And it's an incredibly powerful thing. I can attest to that. So as a result of that, I'm so thrilled to welcome up to the stage Daniel Mintz, who's the Chief Data Evangelist for Looker, and formerly of Upworthy and political organization MoveOn.org. Please join me in welcoming him. Hi, Daniel.
Oh, they spin.
Yes, they do spin.
All right.
So great to have you with us today. I was wondering, it's super interesting because Looker is both a SaaS company itself and helps so many other SaaS companies really understand their data better. What are some of the metrics that you guys used internally in order to figure out that you were on the right track for growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're very much the same ones that you were talking about, right? As a SaaS company ourselves, we're really focused on providing value to our customers, on making sure that that is an ongoing value, right? That 1 year mark as it's coming up, knowing that they've got to renew or not, is a really great driver that makes sure that we're providing ongoing value. So yeah, we're looking at all the sort of classic metrics, CAC, magic number, gross margins, all of those things, as we're figuring out what's working and what's not.
Terrific. And we were talking a little bit before this started, and Daniel was Looker's 22nd customer, which is pretty ridiculous now looking back on it. So what was the experience of Looker like for you as a customer, and how did you love it so much that you ended up working there?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I don't like vendors, so apologies to anyone who sells things in the audience. I'm a technical person, so I just want to play with the product and see what I think and be left alone by the salespeople. But I started talking to the company because we had an early investor who was friends with Looker's founder, and he said, oh, you're building your data stack. You should talk to my friend. They just came out of stealth mode. They're in Santa Cruz, which is a weird place to be based. Chat with him. And so I said, okay, and I got on the phone with Lloyd, who was the founder and basically the only technical salesperson at the time. And he said, I'm not good at explaining what Looker is or what it does. Can I just show you? Can I connect to your database, and then you can ask me any question? And I thought that this would be hilarious. Not liking vendors, I wanted to see a vendor fall on his face on a demo. So I said, sure, yeah, go for it. Connect to our database. So they connected up, and 10 minutes later he said, okay, ask me anything. And I said, okay, how about this? And he said, boop, 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 there it is. And I said, oh, okay, but that was an easy one. How about this? And he said, boop, 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 there it is. And I said, huh. And he said, but have you thought about slicing your data this way? Boop, 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 boop. And it was a thing that I had never seen before in my own data that he was showing me after 10 minutes. And I was like, what is this black magic? This is the thing, right? Yeah. So it totally, he grabbed me with a demo. And then the experience of being Looker's customer was tremendous. They just cared, we just care about customer success in a way that I had never experienced before. Looker has had chat-based support since the very beginning, because they sort of know that if you're a technical person, if you're a developer and you're stuck, it's easy to say, oh, well, just go do something else and then someone will get back to you tomorrow. But the reality is, like, that thing just keeps eating away and you just want to solve it and get to the next thing. And so they were like, we need to be able to solve your problems now. So chat response times are in the sub 1 minute times still today with 1,900 customers. And that has been there since the very beginning. So that was what grabbed me, both the sort of product itself and the commitment to customer success.
So really understanding what your customer needs at the time is really clear, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And then evidencing that in the way that you act towards your customers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I often hear, including from our portfolio, I'll get to BI next quarter. It always feels like one of these things that's kind of not urgent, but everyone knows it's important.
Yeah.
What tells you that a company needs to start implementing something better around data today, now, versus at some time in the future?
Some distant future that keeps moving. It's always tomorrow.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think data is an immensely powerful tool for figuring out sort of how to do what you're doing better, right? I mean, I think the slides that you had about sort of here's the strategic goal, but here are the tactical pieces, I think is really critical and points out the importance of data, not BI. BI is a sort of funny old term that's lived on, but the idea that data can help us make better decisions, I think, is really critical, and that doesn't need to be a big, complicated thing if you're a 5-person company. You do want to build things in a way that's sustainable, that you can grow into what you need, but it doesn't need to be over-engineered. I think most companies start with a data person who comes in, and we sort of colloquially call it the Juan problem at Looker, because we had a customer who they just had a guy named Juan, and he was their data guy. And so if they had a data question, it was like, oh, I don't know, that's a Juan problem, ask Juan. And sadly, Juan was not terribly scalable. And over time, Juan got very tired of doing this. And so then they brought in Looker, because the idea was they wanted to give everybody in the company the ability to ask questions of data and get answers for themselves without having to wait for Juan to get to their request. So I think that is really sort of the normal progression that we see companies take. But I think the key idea is that data can tell you if what you're doing is working or not. And it can give you these operational metrics that help you understand exactly what is working and what's not, because that's what you need to do in order to improve, right? And that's the goal, is to figure out what's not working so you can fix it, to figure out what is working so you can double down on that, right? So it's less about the high-level metrics that you're presenting to VCs. Those, we sometimes call them vanity metrics, and there's nothing wrong with them. They're useful because they help VCs or other investors or even yourself compare to other companies and how you're doing. But they're not the metrics that actually tell somebody in the business, this is what I should do next, right? Operational metrics are those ones where you look at it and you go, oh, I know exactly what I should do in response to this metric because it's telling me that this thing is broken or that this thing could be done better. And those are the metrics that you want to really surface across the company to everybody.
What are some good examples of operational metrics that you've seen work well?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, when you sort of slice down to the lower levels, you often see those things. Oh, that's funny. CAC is very different region by region, or this sales team managed by this sales manager is closing deals at a much higher rate than this sales team managed by this manager. Or even more interestingly, if you look at the sales funnel, maybe different teams are good at different parts of that sales funnel, at converting different parts of that funnel. And so then that starts to tell you, oh, that's interesting. Maybe we should drill in and understand exactly how they're doing so well getting from trial to close, or how they're doing so well getting people from that first meeting into a trial, because there's something to teach everybody else to expand on that, right? The goal is to find the points where people are being really successful and expand on that, grow that and scale it. And so, I think those kinds of operational metrics are the ones that really tip people off. When I'm talking about operational versus vanity, the sort of high-level examples that I'll often give is like, if you're Uber, maybe your vanity metric is total rides taken or MAUs. That's not very operational. There's nothing that I would figure out what to do based on those numbers, but they're useful to understand overall growth and to compare yourself to Lyft. But you know, a good operational metric might be, you know, percentage of rides where the driver takes more than 5 minutes to arrive, right? That tells us that maybe we don't have enough driver coverage in that area. It tells us that, you know, maybe our routing GPS software is not working as well as it should. People are taking inefficient routes. But that's the kind of thing where someone cancels a ride, right? And so those operational metrics, I look at that number, oh, that percentage is going up. I need to dig in and understand what exactly is happening there so I can fix it.
Yeah, super interesting. So, you know, drawing on this idea of operational metrics, you've had a really incredible career kind of spanning a bunch of different industries that you don't often see on one person's resume. Politics, media, and now SaaS. What are some lessons from those other industries that you use to draw on to kind of understand SaaS better?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has been a weird journey, but I think it's, you know, I think there are things that you learn wherever you're working about sort of how to interact with customers. When I started at MoveOn a lot of years ago, actually the first thing I was doing was tech support. And I think what you pointed out about support being such a good avenue for feedback about how your product is working, in our case our product, is absolutely right. I think actually everybody should do support sometime, because it teaches you sort of how to recognize what's your fault and what's the user's fault. It teaches you to empathize with your customers. Lloyd, our founder, likes to say that great software is an act of empathy. And it really is. It's about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and understanding what their needs are, what job they're trying to get done. But you know, I often hear people say, oh, well, that's just user error. And you go, okay, but how many users are making that same error? And support will go like, oh, a lot of users are making that same error. And it's like, okay, well then maybe it's not really user error, maybe it's your product that is deficient in that area, right? Because if the same, you know, if users keep making that same error, then either you don't understand your users and who they are and what their technical skills are, or you've got a problem in your product that everybody is getting tripped up at the same spot. And I think, you know, I absolutely took that away from working at MoveOn and doing tech support there. I also, you know, because MoveOn is this very weird organizational structure where there's about 30 staff and 8 million members, the only way that you can figure out what's going on is data. And so very early there, you know, I had a question and someone said, oh, I don't know, just go query the database.
Ask Juan.
Yeah, ask Juan, right. There was no Juan, it was you were Juan, right? It was go query the database. And I said, what? And they said, just go query the database. And I said, I don't know how to do that. And they said, okay, I'll show you, and then you'll learn, and then you'll be able to ask any question, and the data can tell you. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. Everyone should want to do this. Everyone should learn how to write SQL. And then I discovered that that was a terrible idea, and you should not expect that everyone will learn to write SQL. Some people will want to do that, but most people will not. And fundamentally, I think that's when I saw Looker. I said, oh, this is the thing, because it actually lets everybody have that magical experience of asking the data questions without having to take that crazy step of learning SQL. So, yeah.
Very cool. Maybe a fun one just to close off before we get to questions. What is your favorite example of a customer using their data in a creative way on your platform?
Oh, boy. I mean, there's some fascinating stuff. There's some really interesting sort of data for good examples. The Department of Health and Human Services, their Office of Inspector General in the US, they are one of the many agencies that sort of focused in on the opioid challenge, that, you know, sort of cracking down on the scourge of opioids. And for their 1,600 caseworkers, it used to be a 2-week process to sort of flag a doctor or pharmacy as having sort of an unusual pattern, drill down and get the full data on that so that they could really dig in and understand what was happening and if they needed to follow up. And they put Looker in place, and now it's a 5-minute process because they're sort of able to access that data directly themselves. And so, you know, I'm somebody who really likes, as sort of evidenced by my background in politics, I like sort of doing good and civic uses of data. And so I love those, you know, examples that have popped up here and there, like the OIG of Health and Human Services, or, you know, there's a great nonprofit in the US called Donors Choose, which helps teachers list the needs for their classrooms, which on the one hand is kind of messed up that teachers have to list the needs for their classrooms instead of just getting them filled. But they do an amazing job helping teachers get supplies and activities funded for their classrooms, and they use Looker to sort of show the impact that that's having. So examples like that really are the ones that get me.
Amazing, cool. So I know we have a few questions here, and thank you guys all for submitting these. Talk about employee data literacy. What can you do to improve it? How do you know these efforts are working? I'm happy to take a first crack at this.
Go for it. I love this question, but
yeah,
go for it.
It's a great question. I think Daniel hit on an amazing point, which is, I think at a certain point, when I was doing my research for how we were going to do data at Lightspeed, I talked to a bunch of companies, mostly in New York and also up here in Canada, around how they had built things. There's a huge variance. And the simplest solution was to teach everyone SQL, and as you alluded to. And there's a certain stage in an organization where I think, frankly, it's just not something that you can expect everyone to do.
It makes hiring really hard.
It does make hiring incredibly hard. It was a very kind of important decision for us to use something that wouldn't require anyone to kind of learn a querying language, which is how we found Looker. And I found the most impactful things for us in terms of data literacy were really educating people on what the metrics meant, right? So I'm going to show you conversion rate over a 30-day lag. What does that mean? And how does your performance feed into that? And what are the different data points that are within that? And really creating a data dictionary that was became this common language for employees throughout the company. This was not something I was alone in. I was really lucky that Dax and other executives in the organization were very on board with this. And so at company meetings, we used to pull up, a metric or two and really talk through how important that metric was and how everybody in the company could influence it using their decisions. And that went a long way towards helping people understand not only what is this metric, but also what can I do to improve this metric. So I don't think you necessarily need everyone to understand, to be able to write SQL queries or be able to understand why in LTV you're dividing by churn because the mathematical equation works out that ends up being lifetime value if you make it into a crazy integral function. Nobody needs to know that. But you do need to help people understand what can I do to make this number better. And that's really, I think, the most important part of data literacy.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And I was just going to throw in on the sort of, I think data literacy almost assumes a user error problem, which is, this person isn't smart enough about data to get value from this metric. And so I do think focusing on the why are we measuring this, what does it tell us about our business, everyone at your business is going to be able to grok that and going to care about that. Doing the math probably doesn't appeal to as many people. It appeals to weirdos like me, but not to everyone. Yeah, weirdos like us. But I do think that part of it is finding the right tools that can give people the information that they need right in the workflows that they already have going, right? The understanding what people are doing, what tools they're using, meeting them where they're at, rather than saying, we have this great tool over here, you have to learn how to use it, you have to learn how to understand the data, come to all these trainings, and you have to break out of your existing workflows to get value from data. I think that's actually a huge hindrance to actually getting people value from data. And so finding ways to infuse the workflows that they already have with data that helps them at that decision point make a better choice, that's really what you should be aiming for.
Yeah, and I think, not to sound too much like a commercial for Looker, but I really did love using your product. One of the things that I reflect on when I think about kind of product market fit in terms of Looker is there's this beautiful distinction between view, which is just get a dashboard emailed to you, and then being able to write your own reports, and then the actual coding. And so there's 3 different layers of access that you have. And for most people, they may just get a dashboard, and that's the level of data literacy that they need. And that's frankly most people in an organization. Then you have nerds like you and I who will want to dig into the data a little bit more, and that's explore. And then you have the folks who are kind of controlling the source of truth for that data, who are the actual analysts and programmers working on Looker under the hood. And having that distinction, I thought, was just a beautiful example of really understanding what companies were using data for and how people were going to digest that at the end of the day. So, amazing. Metrics are great, but how do you ensure you're not drinking from a fire hose? Is there a stronger place for AI? I think this is a really great question, right? Like, in a world where you could measure anything, how do you figure out what to measure? And I think, Daniel made a great point here around operational metrics and what things are decision driving and what things are kind of more vanity or high-level metrics that come out as a result of these things, like a payback period or an LTV to CAC. And I think, again, it kind of comes down to like, what is the business you're running, right? For you, if you're not Uber, calculating percentage of rides where the driver shows up more than 5 minutes late is totally useless, right? If you're a food delivery service, that might not be your core metric because you don't really care if the driver shows up late because most of the time the driver's waiting for pickup at the restaurant, for example. So really understanding what are the things that are going into the end metric is the core thing, and it differs for every single company. And I think also understanding which levels of the organization need access to what levels of data can be really powerful here. So for most people in the org, maybe they don't need that level of granularity, but for someone who's a line manager, to continue the use case of Uber, someone who's a line manager for driver experience or rider experience, that might be their core metric that they're measured on, and that's the thing that you would surface to them. So I think it's a difficult question, frankly, to answer in isolation. It's something that you and your executives should be able to derive pretty cleanly from just really thinking through, like, what are the things that I can impact that really change this metric?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, I think, I love a good buzzword, I do, and I think AI ML is the current one, right?
Yeah.
If not blockchain, but I think the reality though is most of the time, if you put the right metric in front of the right person, you don't need a whole lot of magic to know what's going on, right? It's like if you're at the right level of granularity to understand what's actually happening and it's in the right person's hands, they're gonna go like, oh, that's not right. Right? Yeah. We need to fix that. They don't need some magical AI to tell them that. Yeah. I do think that if you put too many metrics in front of people, they are going to get overwhelmed. I always think of a cockpit in a literal dashboard, right? A cockpit in an airplane. There are hundreds of dials and gauges, and those know sort of basically how to say, hey, look at me. Right? If something is an anomaly, some unusual behavior, they're not necessarily going to tell the pilot what to do, but they are going to say, hey, look at me, because there's just too many metrics to keep track of all at once. But if the altimeter goes, hey, look at me, because it's spinning and you're diving, the pilot doesn't need AI to tell her what to do. She can just go, oh, that's not right. I should pull up, maybe the autopilot disengaged or something. And so I think it's really about making sure that right number is in front of the right person at the right time, and most of the time they're going to know what to do about it without some magical AI ML solution to explain it to them.
Yeah, I think my favorite saying about AI and ML is it's AI for your pitch deck and ML when you're hiring.
That's right, yes. Yeah.
I think,
and mostly it's just put the metric in front of the person in reality, right? After they've hired and come in, I have a bunch of data scientist friends who've gotten hired. They're experts in AI ML. They get hired, and the person that hires them says, "Awesome. Now, can you go do some data science?" And they're like, "Sure. Where's the data?" And they're like, "Oh, we don't really understand it. It's like in this giant database, and we don't really know what to do." They're like, "Okay, so I'm going to spend my next year just making sense of the basic metrics for the company and not doing data science," and that's often the reality.
Yep, absolutely right. It seems like we're out of time, unfortunately, but thank you all for your questions and for engaging with me and Daniel today. It's been an absolute pleasure.